There's a word that is used an awful lot in our language, very common word. People will say, well, that's not practical. Or, well, I don't know, that just doesn't sound too practical to me. That's not practical. Or, oh, hey, that'd be good to do. That's very practical. And you hear the word practical used an awful lot. So since it's used an awful lot, and since I am going to talk about what is practical, I want to use Webster's dictionary to define practical in very simple terms. Webster's dictionary says practical means useful, usable. Useful and usable. And obviously, by definition, it pertains to action. It pertains to application, not just theory. Some things are in theory. Something that's practical is usable. Something that's practical is useful. So today I'm going to deal with one of the great practicalities of life. And I want to set the stage this way because it's not always, what I'm going to talk about is not always looked at as practical. It's kind of considered one of the minor things, and it's not even thought of many times as practical, but it is one of the great ones. And you are in the major leagues when you use this, which is very practical. When you major in it, you're majoring in the majors, not in the minors. Anyway, so what I want to do that I'm going to talk about that is practical, and it's one of the great practicalities, I want to measure the usability of it, of this practicality. I want to measure the usability. I want to measure the usefulness. I want to measure the value and impact, and let's start with it through the eyes of God. It's very important to me when I think and I do and operate, when I'm making choices about how I think and operate, that I try to see it through God's eyes. So through God's eyes, I've got better guidance on doing that which God would like to see me be doing. So if it really matters to God, this great practicality that I'm talking about, then we need to pursue and practice the subject as a deep part of our lifestyle. So let's really check it out, and to begin to really get into that practicality and the usability and the usefulness and the value and the impact, I want to turn to an example that is very familiar and go from there, and you find it in Luke 17, verses 11 through 18. Luke 17, verses 11 through 18. Verse 11. And it came to pass, as he went to Jerusalem, on his way to Jerusalem, that he passed through the midst of Samaria and Galilee. And as he entered into a certain village, there met him 10 men that were lepers, which stood afar off. They didn't come close to people, because what people would do if the lepers got too close, they'd pick up stones and sling at them. And I don't know if you've ever been hit with a rock. I have, as a kid, throwing rocks and all. It hurts, and you get bone bruises and all of that. So anyhow, they kept their distance, and they lifted up their voice because they were at a distance, and they wanted to be heard, and so they had to lift their voices up to cover that distance, and they said, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. And when he saw them, he said to them, Go show yourselves to the priests. And it came to pass that as they went, as they were going, here's 10 together. They know each other. They can see each other. And as they're traveling, all of a sudden, as they're going to the priest and they're looking at each other, they see the skin and all going from the leprous condition to good, clean, new, healthy skin. They see that. And one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back and with a loud voice glorified God. He didn't just turn back. He was cleansed of the leprosy. He fell down on his face at his feet, at Christ's feet. He came all the way now over to him. He's clean from the leprosy, giving him thanks. He wasn't even a Jew. He wasn't even an Israelite. He was a Samaritan. He was one of the transplants that the Assyrians had transplanted into the northern kingdom. He was a Gentile. He was a Samaritan. And Jesus, answering, said, were there not 10 cleansed? I think I counted 10. But where are the 9? He noticed. Did it bother him? Now, they were going to have to, just like this one would then go later, he would go to the priest and get it officially certified that he didn't have leprosy anymore. So he went on later, I'm sure, but he was filled with gratitude and thanks and had to come back and thank Christ. And Christ notices that only one of the 10 comes back to say thanks. There are not found, verse 18, there are not found that return to give glory to God except this stranger. And from an Israelitish standpoint, he was a stranger. And Christ said, he said to him, arise, go your way, your faith has made you whole. Now you think about it. Just 1 in 10. I think that number probably hits too close to the mark. That is the human mark, the natural carnal mind. Those odds are probably just about right because thankfulness is such a rare, it is a precious, and it is a scarce commodity. And as I look about me in society today, it's a dying trait, but then I think, well, it's not just a dying trait in our society today. It's not something that's just germane to or intrinsic to our times that we live in now. Yeah, it is, but it's always been that way with human beings. It's a dying trait, but I think there are times when a society has more of it than they do other times, and certainly in our day and age, we see that it is a dying trait, a virtue or a quality, and people don't value it. They don't value it. Children aren't being taught it. How many children are being taught to look for what the blessings are in their lives and to be thankful for those blessings? It's not considered one of the important, here's that word again, practical things. It's not considered, oh, I teach my children the things that will really help them. And I was taught what would really help. But, you know, it's nice to be thankful, and it's a good thing, yeah, but it's not one of the practical things. But is it? Let's analyze that thankful leper. Now, first of all, he couldn't cleanse himself. He was doomed to whatever remainder of life he had as a leper, and all that went with being a leper until the day he died. He was stuck with that. Christ gave him the tremendous blessing of healing him of that leprosy. All 10 of them. And one of them was so thankful that he just had to come back and had to bow before Christ and had to thank him and give glory to him and God. Let's analyze the thankful leper, in a sense, versus the 9 who maybe they were thankful to a point, but to the point they were was not as deep as the thankfulness of this one. But let's analyze this thankful leper. Number 1, you ask yourself this question. Reckon how he treated God in his life after that. Reckon how he treated God. With the kind of gratitude he had to come back to Christ and bow at his feet and give glory to God and thank. Reckon how he treated God in his life after that, both in his thoughts and in his doings. I think it made a tremendous impact on the rest of his life. And maybe God the Father called him and he became a part of the New Testament church later. Someday we'll know. Scripture doesn't tell us, on that. It's silent on that. And if he was called into the church, we'll know that someday. Of course, if he wasn't called, someday he will be called in the general resurrection. Number 2, reckon how he treated and appreciated his freedom and flexibility. And I did say freedom, and I did say flexibility, because if you were a leper, you weren't free. If you were a leper, you weren't flexible. You know what life is made of? You can break life down into 3 points. Life is made of places to go, things to do, people to see. That's really what life is made of. And that's wonderful. And to have the freedom and the flexibility to do that. Reckon how he treated and appreciated that freedom and that flexibility to have places to go now, people to see, things to do in the community after that he did not have as a leper. He had been an ostracized outcast. And as I said, you crowd people, you could crowd another leper, but you crowd somebody that's not a leper, you could get rocked, literally, stoned. You'd back off. That's why they kept their distance. If you didn't know, you learned the hard way very quickly. Number 3. Reckon how he treated and treasured his relationships with his family now, that he could be with. He couldn't sit down at the dinner table with them. He couldn't walk along the roadsides with them. He couldn't be at weddings. He couldn't be at reunions. He couldn't be with family. Leprosy had cut him off from them. Reckon how he treated and treasured his relationships with family and friends after that. Leprosy that had cut him off no longer was cutting him off. And number 4, reckon how he valued and treated his health after that. We don't know why he had leprosy, but obviously it's a debilitating disease that generally does eventually kill you and gives you a miserable life in the meantime, no quality of life. That's all gone. Now he's got new skin, a new body, new being in that sense. The leprosy is gone, but is he health conscious? Is he aware? I think so. Reckon how he valued and treated his health after that, using what had been restored in a way to honor God, starting with coming to Christ's feet there. So of the 10 lepers healed, it's an obvious, isn't it? Isn't it a given that of the 10 lepers healed, none of them valued and treasured and appreciated their blessing to the degree. Not saying they didn't appreciate their blessing, not saying that they weren't thankful to a point for their blessing, but it's obvious by the response, the follow-up action, that none of them valued, treasured, appreciated their blessing to the degree that he did. And again, how do we know that? It's obvious. He was the only one that it meant enough to him to say, thanks. God be given the glory. Thanks. The appreciation ran deepest in him. The recognition, the value, the appreciation ran deepest with him, as shown and illustrated by his thankfulness. And again, too many consider it. This is in general human affairs. Too many consider it not to be one of the important things. It's not one of the practical things. Well, yeah, it's nice to be thankful. Yeah, it's nice to show appreciation. Yeah, you're a better person if you're grateful for the blessings you have. But it's not really that useful. It's not really that usable, which means it's not really that practical because it doesn't put, as the saying goes, it doesn't put food on the table. Practical things put food on the table. It doesn't put food on the table. Oh yeah? Does it? Or does it not? Have you ever noticed that things cost? Things cost. Like I said, I do all the shopping. Things cost, and they're costing more. And very few, some folks maybe, but very few people have unlimited money. Oh, it's just $100. Oh, it's just $1,000. Oh, it's just, whatever. It's just $1 million, whatever. Very few have unlimited money. Guess what? If you're thankful for something, what do you do with it? You take care of it. If you're thankful for it, you take care of it. You realize a tool will last longer, put back in the shed, than just left out on the ground in the weather for days, weeks, or months. You'll take care of it. I've always been amazed at, and it used to be, and still is a lot of times, but other SUVs are brought into play too with it, certain SUVs, but those pickup advertisements where they pick the roughest road they can find with the potholes and the gullies and the rocks, and they take them off-road and get them in the rocks, and they're bouncing them all over the place. They're completely leaving the ground in some cases. You couldn't sell me one of those after they have done that with them. It's like, I know why they do it, both for the image that it presents, especially young men in particular, the sense of power and be able to go here and go off-road and do this and do that, and I want one tough truck, so I'm buying that one. And I understand why they do it and what they're playing to. And they're, the competition, they're all trying to outdo each other. But I wouldn't want one of those. If I went in to buy a pickup and they said, we got a special deal over here, this one you see right here, that's the one we used in that advertisement where we jumped rocks and everything else. We'll knock off $1,000 off of retail. So you can have it for $40,000 instead of $41,000, whatever. Pickups, and you pay a lot more than that for a pickup these days, brand new, full size. Anyway, no, I'm sorry. You got something else? No, I wouldn't buy that. I think about the lack of, not just the lack of reality, but what it teaches a lot of times the kids coming along in terms of, quote, taking care of something. Oh, you can roughhouse that, you can do that roughshod, it won't matter. Nothing's going to break, it's not going to tear up, it's not going to need fixing because it's tough. Remember the Dukes of Hazzard? I got to reach back. Dukes of Hazzard, General Lee, the Dodge Charger, they were jumping all kinds of things and crashing them. I forget the exact number, but they had to have something like 28 of those vehicles in order to make sure they always had one available to do another scene where it was going to get smashed or break an axle or whatever. Obviously, they had a body shop, and they constantly had the General Lee, because they had all kinds of clones that they were working on. But I think about this. No thankful person drives and treats his vehicle like that. I grew up seeing my parents take care of what they had. My dad grew up very poor. Hillside farmer in the hills and hollers of northeast Mississippi. Dad was the second oldest, and they had to work to meet just basic needs. Mom had it better off than Dad. They didn't have things to waste. The family didn't have things to waste. They had it better than Dad's family did. But they both had to take care of what they had and make it last. And they taught that to us. And they always taught us that when you have something, taking care of it is one way you show your appreciation for it, for the blessing, by taking care of it. We were taught to take care of the things we were given. Now, growing up, I grew up on, quote, gravel roads. And, of course, later on, they paved all of those. The state roads were already paved, but the roads that I grew up on were gravel. Now, what that means is on a red clay base, over time with weather, the gravel winds up in two places, either pressed down into the clay or over in the ditch. And so every so often they would bring gravel trucks along and dump fresh gravel, and the road grader would come along and dig out of the ditches, put his blade where he could clean the ditches, pulling that gravel back up into the road and leveling it out. And a lot of the gravel was pebble size, some was egg size, some was fist size. And whenever we would, of course, the process of beginning to make ruts in it again would start all over. But Mom and Dad would drive those roads at the proper speed and be careful to try to dodge the big rocks, because you can knock a hole in your oil pan, you can knock a hole in your gas tank, and it was counterproductive to have to go to the repair shop and spend money that, if you'd have driven like you should, you'd had that money for other things. But out of thankfulness for what they had and taking care of it, they drove like they should. I knew some people who lived on the road we lived on. They would seem to get in their vehicle and see how fast they could go up the gravel road. So every so often they were having to have an oil pan repaired or a gas tank repaired, and that wasn't cheap. Plus, it was a total waste of money. But again, we were taught to take care of the things we were given, because again, that's one way of saying thanks. That's a way of showing appreciation. That's a tangible, concrete way of living thankfully. I came off of the fleet program back in 1995. I've run my own vehicles since that time, and when it was time to change oil, look outside and say, well, I know I got to make a trip tomorrow where I'm going to put 200 more miles on it, or 3, or maybe 4, depending on what area I was located in. And it's already at the point where it needs an oil change, but it's 35 degrees out there, and there's a little light drizzle may turn into ice, and I got to go tomorrow, and it needs an oil change, but it'd sure be a whole lot better just to stay in here in the office. Nope. Put on my work clothes, get my ramps, pull the car up on the ramps, crawl under it, change the oil, warm my hands up later, because oil is the life of an engine. And putting on 200,000-300,000 miles on a car, all these years, I've never lost an engine. Oil, clean oil, and filters. I like that car. It drives good, runs good, got a lot of life left in it, got a lot of investment in it already. I want it to keep going. We're going to get under there. I'm going to change that oil and roll on another few thousand miles and then change it again. But the more you look into and analyze this subject, the more you realize just how practical it is, because being thankful, living thankfully, is practical. That is practical living. Thankful living, very simple. Thankful living is practical living. And so if you like a title, and I've gotten into this one much deeper, but you know what I'm talking about, thankfulness and practicality. So just title the sermon this way: Thankfulness is practical. Thankfulness is practical. That is, thankfulness is usable. It's useful. 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 and 2. 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 and 2. This know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come. And of course, as I've always said, the perilous times that come because of what follows. Perilous times are the effect. The causes are what you read in verse 2 on. It's not that perilous times produce those things. Those things produce the perilous times. And it does become a downward spiral that bounces off of itself and feeds itself. Verse 2, why perilous? For men shall be lovers of their own selves. Lovers of their own selves. Covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents. You know, you've got this bad list going, and right there in it, unthankful. Unthankful. One of the main things that generates and produces perilous times is unthankfulness. And again, I would say, how so? How does unthankfulness produce perilous times? See, what you are not thankful for, you will not treasure properly. What you're not thankful for, you won't treasure properly, which means it will translate into neglect or abuse. You don't neglect what you treasure. You don't abuse what you treasure. And you treasure what you're thankful for. So if you're not thankful for it, you don't treasure it, and you wind up neglecting it, at the least, and at the most abusing. And see, the blessing, whether it's a person, because people are blessings in our lives, whether it's a person, whether it's an opportunity that we know is a blessing, or it's a thing. The blessing, whether it's a person, an opportunity, or a thing, is not properly valued. It's not properly treasured, not properly treated. Those not thankful, because, too, those not thankful are never truly content with their state or their blessings. They don't properly appreciate and properly use what they do have, because their eyes are always over there on something else. What you find, and you can probably stick some names on some of these statements of people that you know. It could be somebody in your family. It could be coworkers. It could be friends. But it generates, a lack of thankfulness generates a discontent of spirit. A discontent of spirit. See, if someone does appreciate something, if they're thankful for it, again, they show it by using the blessing properly. But when there's no thankfulness, what happens? What results? Again, at the most, abuse, but at the least, neglect. And discontent sets in. I'm tired of this. I wish I had such and such. I'm tired of, this is not that important to me anymore. If I lose it, I lose it. If it breaks, it breaks. If it's gone, it's gone. No big loss. I need something different anyway. We get disgruntled. And again, the results to one degree or another are lust. I won't be played to by advertising. I know the subliminal messages. And the thing is, they're not subliminal anymore. They're just right out front, direct and in your face. You know, I see how ads are trying to manipulate me. I see how sometimes programs are trying to manipulate me. And I just automatically find resistance in me. I resent that. I automatically resist that. I don't want them trying to generate in me lust or greed or covetousness, because that is part of what the god of this world is trying to get through certain mediums, avenues, what it wants to get into us as a human race. Lust, greed, covetousness, which all lead to destruction of one sort or another. And in needlessly pursuing more, because we're not thankful for what we do have, then what we do have, guess what? It becomes devalued, neglected, abused. And the first and foremost, biggest blessings of all that are lost in the shuffle are what? God and his values. Those are the first things to go in a society. Again, as Timothy was told here in this letter to him by Paul. Unthankful, perilous times shall come. And then the things are listed that generate those perilous times, and the perilous times and those things feed on each other. The first thing lost in the shuffle are God and his true values. In an unthankful society, these are the first casualties. Folks, we're living in a time when there are those who want to teach our children to hate America. We're living at a time when, instead of God bless America, they want America condemned. There is no nation on earth that's ever been perfect and shall not be in this age. But the greatest nation that's ever been, and a nation that has tremendously been used to help bless other nations, is the United States of America. But we're at a time now where there are those who want our children to hate America. If you teach children to acknowledge the blessings of America, rather than focus on what all is considered the cursings, and look at the blessings of America, and that maybe God's hand was there with us to bless us, well, you're part of the enemy now. Parents have no right to tell the teachers what to teach their children. That's how far we've fallen into this ungodliness. And do you think that those who hold that mantra are thankful for the blessings of America? No, God and his true values in an unthankful society are the first casualties. God and his righteousness cease to be the focus. What is your righteousness? What is your righteousness based on? Or what is your right way of living based on, in one sense? I mean, there's more than one way to express it, but God and his righteousness, that is our focus. Matthew 6:33, to seek the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And these other things will be added to us. And Proverbs talks about how that when greed settles in, you know, greed can find no true fertile ground in a thankful heart. Greed, Proverbs says, leaks away the life. That's in Proverbs 1:19. Proverbs 1:19. It leaks away the life. See, without thankfulness, guess what? People become lovers of themselves. They become lovers of themselves. Again, 2 Timothy 3, verse 2, unthankful, unholy. For men shall be lovers of their own selves. And when they become lovers of their own selves, well, covetousness sure follows suit, right on the heels. Boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy. Narcissism. You know what narcissism is by one definition? I know what the technical definition is, but let me give you my definition of narcissism. A narcissist, chronic self. That's what chronic, a chronic issue of self. Now, when you say thanks for something, when you feel thanks and you say thanks, when that one leper said thanks and gave glory to Christ and to God, what is that? What was he doing and what is it? Thanks is an acknowledgement that you have been given something. In his case, he'd been given a healthy body again. He'd been given healthy skin. He'd been given freedom from leprosy. Thanks is an acknowledgement that you have been given something. That automatically is generating a focus beyond yourself. And again, without thankfulness, a discontent sets in, a dissatisfaction. And what happens in society if you can generate a discontent a dissatisfaction with what people have, what can you get them to do? If they become discontented and dissatisfied with what they have, they want something new, something different. You can get them to buy, you can get them to purchase, you can get them to change, you can manipulate them. But here's the thing. Without thankfulness, a discontent sets in, which is played to. A dissatisfaction sets in, which is played to, because self, chronic self, is never satisfied. Think about it. I need more. I need something different. And here's one of the big tragedies of our day and age. I need somebody else. I need somebody new. I'm not happy with what I have anymore. I'm not happy with who I have anymore. You know, there's a reason why the prophecies about us talking about every man neighing like a horse after his neighbor's wife, because our society is full of it, and vice versa. I'm not happy with who I have anymore. You know, peace of mind, which is so wonderful to have, and contentment of spirit and enjoyment, it's stripped away. You know, when you don't have peace of mind, you don't have contentment of spirit, you don't have enjoyment, that's a pretty miserable state to be in. Out of it comes heartaches, miseries, emptiness, loneliness, financial consequences. You have a whole lot of people right now, more than will admit it, who are dreading the coming season. I'm talking about out there who are involved in it. You got a lot of folks who are dreading what they've got to go through in spending money they don't have to spend, for gifts they don't want to give, to somebody who's not going to give them something equal in return. There are a lot of folks that are happy to get past it more than you might realize, but they're caught in something that God's freed us from. And then some will use what's coming up as an excuse to really spend what they shouldn't on something that they really wanted and all. But financial consequences, instabilities, delinquency, crime, drugs, broken homes, we start putting all that together, it's no wonder you have perilous times. Generates perilous times. And remember, all things start in the cranium. All things start in the mind. That's what Proverbs 4:23 says. Proverbs 4 in verse 23. Keep your heart, and heart can be synonymous with attitude, mind, motivation. There are a number of synonyms that can fit depending on context. Proverbs 4:23, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Out of your heart, your motives, your motivation, your mind, your attitude, all of that. Well, thankfulness is one of the prime issues of life, and there is no substitute for living thankfully. And I think about how that when you look at today's problems, being thankful would help avoid so many of today's problems. You know, certain things are considered safeguards of the mind. There are certain things that we look at and we say, okay, I need this in place as a safeguard of the mind. Those are things that help to protect our thinking and being. And this is one of them. And it translates into some very real fruits and effects. Ingratitude, unthankfulness, is one of the footsteps to destruction. You know, I think about Israel, for example, and they're written in there for our example. One of the most often used terms to describe them was murmurers. That just means complainers. They were not thankful. Look at what all God did for them. Well, yeah, God, but what are you doing for me now? What are you doing for me now? Yeah, God, don't remind me of what you did for me yesterday. That was yesterday. This is today. What are you doing for me now? They were not thankful. They took God's blessings for granted. And that took their eyes off of their golden opportunities and blessings and led them to their destruction, because what did that generation wind up doing? We're not going in. We're not going into the land. No, We've been deceived. God's held out on us. We're not going in. We just wish we'd have died in this wilderness. We're back in Egypt. God said, okay, that can be arranged, that can be allowed. Okay. Oh, we'll go in. I'm not with you. I've already made the decision by your own words. So instead of being in a land of milk and honey, and I mean a golden land of milk and honey, it was like a miniature United States of America when they came to the border. It was truly, it wasn't a desert waste and all like it became in time. No, it was a rich land of milk and honey, of streams, creeks, and springs, and ponds, and forests, and grass. I mean, it was vineyards, orchards. It was beautiful. Instead, they got 40 years of grit and sand and heat and scorpions and whatever else was out there. They took God's blessings for granted. It took their eyes off their golden opportunity. It led their destruction. And you think about it, after the magnitude of Egypt and slavery, here they were free and on the road to a golden land of opportunity, and they blew it. And as much as anything that played a role in their blowing it was their ingratitude. But again, that too is part of an old pattern. Part of the mix in Lucifer's fall was ingratitude. You know, I want you to think about this. When Lucifer was created, he was a super angel. There's never been an angel created by God that was more super than Lucifer. Michael might match him, Gabriel might match him. But they didn't exceed him because he was a super angel. He, with possibly the exception of Michael and Gabriel, he could look around and see that no other angel was given more than he was given. That his talents, his abilities, his capacities, his training, his opportunities exceeded the others, with again, possibly the exception of Michael and Gabriel. Was he thankful for that? I think for a time, he was, because he wasn't created as the devil. He was created upright and all of that. Notice Job 38. Job 38. He was given a throne in due time. Was that sufficient? Was he thankful for it? He's like, thank you, God, for this throne, this responsibility, this opportunity to be a major team player and to carry out your plans. Thank you. Well, he might have started out that way, but it didn't take long to where, my throne is not big enough. My throne, that's not big enough. I need more. I need a bigger throne. In fact, I need the throne. I need the throne of the universe. I need the throne of all existence. I need God's throne. And the more he thought along that line, as well as other lines, the more discontented he became, the more he corrupted himself. And I know that ingratitude did play a part. See, when the earth was created, it says, and I'll read these first few verses here in Job 38. Verse 1, Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now your loins like a man, for I will demand of you, and you answer me. Where were you, Job, when I laid the foundations of the earth, when I created the earth? Declare it if you have understanding. Who has laid the measures thereof, if you know? Or who has stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof when the morning stars? Lucifer was a morning star. When the morning stars sang together. And all the sons of God, all the angels, shouted for joy, singing and with joy, because this was pre-Luciferian rebellion. This was pre-1/3 of the angels going corrupt. They were together. And if they're singing together and shouting for joy, in that mix is gratitude and thankfulness and all. But the time came when that was lost, and what they had wasn't enough. And I know that Lucifer's ingratitude and what he was able to help foster in 1/3 of the angels is part of what blew him out of the saddle. Ingratitude can blow someone out. See, taking for granted is always a negative. And like the old saying goes, and this comes from the time when you got your water from a well, in our case, a windlass, you drop the bucket, the rope, the bucket down into the well, maybe 75 feet down, maybe 50 feet down, whatever, and you cranked it up, or from a spring. But the old saying, in those times and in those areas, you don't miss the water till the well goes dry. You drop your bucket down in the well one day, and it just clangs, and you drag mud or something, oh, our well has gone dry. And that's a fairly serious situation. See, taking God's blessings for granted always produces negative results. It doesn't matter which blessings of God or which true blessings of life you're talking about. Taking them for granted always produces negative results. Because again, what you're thankful for, whether it's person, opportunity, or thing, what you're thankful for, you value, you treasure it, you take care of it. And what you're not thankful for, at the least you're going to have some measure of neglect, and at the most, abuse. And of course, you wind up with a mind that's restless regarding what you have, and maybe a mind that just winds up with pure greed. But when you are thankful, your eyes become very focused, very attuned to what you do have, and you make proper use of them. So in that sense, thankfulness also takes on a preserving quality. It's like the truth. If you're really thankful for the truth, if you thank God for the truth and you're really thankful for it, you're going to appreciate the truth. You're going to retain the truth. You're going to exercise the truth. You're going to live the truth. Thankfulness has a preserving quality. See, the thing about it is it always translates into real fruit, real good, positive fruits and effects. When you're thankful for what you have, you don't fall into the trap of trying to get what he has that's his. Or Mr. Jones has a better car than me, or Mr. Jones has a better house than me, or Mr. Jones has whatever, and I got to keep up with the Joneses, as we always said. So this I've got, well, I used to really appreciate it, but I realize now it's not up to par to what I deserve. I need that. So I'm going to go after that. Or my mate doesn't look as pretty or beautiful as she used to. My mate doesn't look as handsome as he used to. My mate is not quite the perfect person that I thought she was or he was. And, maybe I deserve to have somebody better. Maybe I deserve to have somebody that appreciates me more. And the grass does look greener on the other side of the fence. We have these sayings and jokes because that's the way that's what human beings are susceptible to. And part of our growth and learning is to learn what human beings are susceptible to, and since we're a human being, not to fall susceptible to that, not to give in to it, and to recognize the devices of the devil, to recognize the wiles of the devil, and not fall prey. You know, one of the great beauties of thankfulness is you will learn even more so to truly appreciate what God gives you and what you have and use it wisely and well. This is why I'm going over to 1 Timothy 6 and verse 6. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 6. This is why Paul says in 1 Timothy 6, verse 6, but godliness with contentment is great gain. Now, again, I don't think I need to go off into and clarify that riches and wealth are not in and of themselves wrong. Abraham was rich. Solomon was rich. That's not the problem. And I can guarantee you that at whatever point in state Abraham was and whatever measure of wealth and goods he had, he was thankful for what he had. And he had contentment with what he had. Godliness with contentment is great gain. And I think about Paul's words also to the Philippians in Philippians 4 and verse 11, where he said this. Paul said in Philippians 4 and verse 11, he said, not that I speak in respect of want or lacking, because obviously Paul had to deal with a lot of lacking at times. Not that I speak in respect of want. I mean, there was a time when Paul probably wished he had a life vest. Instead, he just had to hook an arm over a floating piece of debris in the shipwreck, and probably was thankful for that piece of debris and God keeping him afloat and sparing his life at that time. But anyway, he says, for I have learned. He didn't say it was automatic with me. It just came natural. He says, I've learned. That's growth process. I have learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. And he's not talking about the issue that if you're in a poor state and you have a way to better your state with some extra hard work or whatever, as long as you keep your priorities straight, that's wrong. He's talking about learning to live in a certain state of mind where he's not discontented. And obviously, even to be able to make that statement that he makes there has to be a heavy measure of gratitude involved to be able to do that. And such capacity, such ability in your mind, in your thinking, is a great benefit of mind. And one of the things that has the power to keep you from being driven to distraction by so many things. Here in Philippians 4 and verse 6, when it says, be careful for nothing, it's talking about not falling prey to anxiety. We all have to deal with certain issues, but don't fall prey to it. Learn how to not have anxious care. But in everything by prayer, notice, in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Some people will say, I don't know where to start with prayer. I don't know how to pray. I can't get going. I don't know. Okay, I'll tell you a perfect way to always get going if you have trouble getting going. Just stop and start thinking about what you've got to be thankful for that you can thank God for. Thank you, God, for my eyesight. I mean, my eyesight took a hit in January of 2018, and I realized I could lose my eyesight. That'll shake you up if you think you're going to possibly lose your eyesight. Thank you for my eyesight, God. Thank you for my hearing. It doesn't work so well in restaurants when there's background noise, but it still works well enough. Thank you for my hearing. Thank you for my mind. Thank you for my memory. Thank you for my mobility. Thank you for so-and-so. Thank you for health, for energy. Thank you for opportunity. Thank you for your truth. Thank you for your great mercies. I mean, you could thank you for my children. Thank you for my friends. You could just start off thanking God. And Paul is talking about how in everything by prayer and supplication with a mind that is a mind of gratitude. You know, thank you, God, that my knees are still healthy enough that I can bend them before you. The day comes my knees won't bend, I'll sit. And it'll mean just as much to you. Or if I have to lean on a staff like the patriarchs, I'll do that. But thank you that my knees still work well enough. There's all kinds of things you can thank God for. But talking about praying and requesting from a mind that's wrapped in gratitude, a thankful asker, in a spirit of mind and manner of thanksgiving. And why should God give more to someone who doesn't properly appreciate and use what he's already given? God, I would sure like to have a whole lot nicer car than I've got. Well, let's see. From what I've noticed, you don't take care of what you've got. Dad, could you buy me another such and such? Well, son, from what I've observed, you don't take care of what you have right now, so why should I buy you another one and a better one? You know, that type of thing. Ephesians 5:20. Thankfulness is practical. Ephesians 5:20. Giving thanks always. Let me tell you a little secret about repetition. Somebody might go on their knees and say, well, if I thank God for this and that, I thanked him for it yesterday morning. So, were you thankful for it yesterday morning? Well, yes. Are you thankful for it today? Yeah. Well, if you're sincere, God was pleased that you were thankful yesterday morning with what you thanked him for. Why wouldn't he be pleased today that you're still thankful for it and you're still thanking him for it? And you think about that. Repetition, there's not a thing wrong with it as long as it is sincere. It's only when it becomes vain or empty repetition that something is wrong with it. Remember what God told them when they were going into the land? Don't forget that it is God who gives you the power to get wealth. That's in Deuteronomy 8, verses 17 and 18. And as I wrap this up, I think about James 1:17 and about how he says there in James 1:17 that every good gift comes from God. I think about the air we breathe. I think about the food we eat, the water we drink. I think about life. I think about energy. I think about opportunity. I think about how that God is the originator of everything worthwhile having, that the good gifts are from God. And we may humanly neglect them, might even abuse them, but thankfulness helps us not to. Not taking for granted helps us to live thankfully. One more scripture or two, maybe just one. Psalm 69. Psalm 69 and verse 30. Thankfulness raises our consciousness of God's presence and God's value in our eyes. Think about the 10 lepers. Think about them crying out to Jesus to heal them. Think about the value in their lives of God. And think specifically of that one leper who came back. Think about how his thankfulness not only raised his consciousness of God's presence, brought him back into the presence of God, to Jesus Christ right there, but God's value in his eyes, because if it weren't for the man that he came back to, who was God in the flesh, that leper bowed down before and thanked him, he would have continued to be a leper for the remainder of his days. I will praise the name of God with a song and will magnify him. How do you make God bigger? How do you magnify him? I mean, God is God. I can't make him bigger. I can't make him smaller. What can I do that makes God more God than God is, or less God than he is? Nothing. So what's it talking about? It talks about you're magnifying him in your mind. He's becoming more valuable to you. He's becoming greater in your mind and your thinking. What does it take to make him more important and magnified in our minds? Magnify him with thanksgiving. I want to make a couple of points in closing. It's wonderful to have a national day of Thanksgiving. It's a right principle. It's a good principle. There's nothing wrong with it. But on the one hand, it's kind of sad that we have to have a national day of Thanksgiving to point people to thankfulness as a nation. And I realize on one level, it's really good to do and we need to do it. I understand that. But for so many people, it will just simply be a day of football and turkey and beer and kind of a party time. And it may be done properly, not improperly. And again, that's okay, but that's all that will mean to a lot of people. Now, I'm going to eat well that day, and I'll probably watch some football and all, nothing wrong with that. But I just think it's kind of sad that we have to have a national day to bring people's attention to it, and that's just what it will do. It'll bring some people, many people's attention to it, and as soon as the day's over, they kind of forget it. Whereas every day should be a day of Thanksgiving. But the day after Thanksgiving will be Black Friday, when people will rush out to really big time, more so than they're doing right now, get ready for Christmas with gifts and all. I often think about how we, as Americans, have the most of any people on earth to be thankful for, and I think about how we, as God's people, the American congregation, how much we have to be thankful for. But I want to close and put a thought in your mind about the value, an additional thought about the value of being thankful, as it being a practical, useful thing, and how valuable it is, and especially in terms of magnifying God in our hearts and minds. So in closing, and throwing in an additional thought and consideration, let's step forward 1,000 years. Actually, at this point, it'd be a little bit more than 1,000 years. We don't know if it'll be 10 or 15 or 20 or whatever, more than 1,000, but let's step forward to the time when the 1,000 years under Jesus Christ's rule on this earth has been completed. And Satan is loosed to go about for a short season and work on mankind. He finds a following, doesn't he? And he leads them in rebellion against God. Now, have you ever asked yourself, why? How? How could that be? Why would that be, or could be, after 1,000 years of Jesus Christ ruling, and we ruling with him? Of course, we don't know how many billions of people will be on earth by that time, but an awful lot. But after 1,000 years, what makes or allows anyone to be susceptible to him? Think about it. Those who've experienced the awesome blessings of the millennium, born into those blessings, lived with those blessings, have had a lifetime with those blessings, and have taken them for granted. See, for granted is a phrase that means not appreciative, not thankful. Those who have lived with awesome blessings from childhood up and have not truly appreciated or treasured them, those who have not lived thankfully and have become ungrateful. I want you to think about this. Unthankfulness and gratitude is part of what makes them sitting ducks for Satan. On the other hand, thankfulness, gratitude, living thankfully as a way of life would have preserved them and made them immune to Satan's influence. It would have preserved them. It's among the ungrateful. Now, there's some other things I think involved too, yes, but it is among the ungrateful he will find fertile ground. and get a following. Well, after Thursday, National Thanksgiving will be gone as far as a holiday for it, but it must not be gone with us. Today must be a day of Thanksgiving for us, and tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and last Monday should have been, and all. Whether of material things, you can slice it any way you want, but whether of material things, people and relationships, opportunities and experiences, life, thankfulness is practical. It's not a platitude. It's practical. And living thankfully is living practically. And we must learn how to be, and we must learn how to remain God's thankful people, living thankfully. And that is, brethren, it truly is one of the most important things we will ever get set in our thinking, our operation, and the way we do things that we'll ever do. And it's something that, guess what? It will be part of us for eternity. I was thankful there was some water up here.